evolution, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Whatever you call it, it's the harsh reality that governs our natural world. And as we've learned firsthand on this journey, nowhere in the world is harsher than Antarctica, an alien planet that you can visit by boat. Isolated for tens of millions of years, the life in Antarctica is trapped in a never-ending struggle for limited resources, where the strong will always defeat the weak, and the weak will always die. Right? This is the Antarctic Icefish. It may not look like it at first glance, but this fish might be even crazier than the 1,000-foot glacier out behind the station, because this fish is science's most dramatic, documented case of de-evolution. Dr. Bill Detrich has spent his whole career trying to figure out why this fish exists, because if evolution works the way you normally think it would work, this fish should not exist. But it does. So tonight, we're going to go out on the big boat and do some epic Antarctic fishing. Hopefully catch some ice fish and try to figure out, is it actually possible that Antarctica is so extreme, it broke evolution? So the science team is shorthanded after Bill's accident, so I'm gonna film a couple of the nets coming up, but then I actually have to put the camera down and help sort the fish, which should be interesting, we'll see.
All the fish are important, but the ice fishes are the most important one, because they are the most fragile one. When we bring them to the aquarium room, and that's going to be the thing, that we carry them one by one, and we hold them, especially the ice fishes, we hold them in the bubbles. Like if that is a fish, much bigger, but you try to get your hand flat under the head like that, and then you hold around the tail, but don't squeeze the tail. Even a fish that is knocked out will have a reflex and gonna start like bouncing. So you just like sustain it. You don't like grab it. You're gonna see we are kind of like in a rush. It feels rushy, but don't forget that we still have time. Like it's not because there's like this rush to get the fish out of the net that we need to like cut corners and not be careful enough. Like we have the time.
Cynocephalus aceratus, common name, the blackfin icefish. Icefish are exclusively found in Antarctica and can be easily identified by their ghostly white color. They are the only vertebrates on Earth to lack red blood. This bizarre lack of a traditional oxygen transport system has made icefish sluggish and delicate with no apparent benefits. Compared to red-blooded Antarctic fish, icefish are frail and vulnerable. They require an oxygen-rich environment, making them extremely difficult to catch alive. When pulled from a fishing net, icefish will almost always be on the verge of suffocation and death, their mouths stuck wide open and their bodies paralyzed in a state of shock. Their Greek genus name, Cynocephalus, translates to yawn head in English, referring to this phenomenon. It is extremely important to have them back in water as quickly as possible, or else they will not survive the night.
Go, let's move things out. Move things out. There's a big one here.
Notothenia coreoceps, common name, the bullhead notothen. This red-blooded Antarctic fish stands in strong contrast to the white-blooded icefish. The coreoceps is a sturdy and vigorous fish, easy to catch and keep alive. They, along with all other Antarctic fish, have an antifreeze protein, which allows them to live in the cold Antarctic waters.
Yes. That's a Georgianus. Yeah.
To revive a paralyzed icefish, shock its system with oxygen by holding its gills in bubbly water.
How is she doing?
She's doing okay.
Good. That's a very, very good toe.
Oh, look at that.
Those
How many forceps?
plus 10, 23, 30 cordyceps. Just cordyceps.
No.
Yeah. I think that's a record. We have a dead fish.
Which one is this one?
Which one do you think it is?
Good question. Is it Rastrostinosis? Agonori?
It's the naked dragonfish, Gymnodraco acuticeps. And I think it was already dead. It didn't die during the net.
So do you want to freeze it
Yeah.
entirely?
So we're gonna just quickly weigh it, measure it,
Yeah.
freeze it.
Okay.
Yeah, great, Thomas. I'm gonna be into the wet lab for maybe 10-15 minutes just to dissect the fish. Awesome, thanks. So this guy is a dragonfish, and actually this species there is really like the closest related species to icefish. Because it's rare to obtain these fish, I definitely want to do something with it. There it goes.
It was so amazing to see all those fishes coming up. the net, displaying the species, which one is which one. Good first time.
That was a good one.
How do you see so quickly which one is good, which one we don't care about?
Done it many times.
Yeah.
Usually every season we do about like between 50 and 70 trawls. So after a while you just see a tail pointing out and you just know that that's a nice fish, that's something else. Like
It's very fast.
sometimes what I've done is to like just get like a little white bucket just next to me, and when I see a strange creature I just like put it in there.
What are you calling sea creature for?
Anything that is not a fish. I don't know, like snails, ascidians, octopus, starfish, sea urchins, all those little
Why are
things.
some fish so fragile and then others are like don't seem to mind the trawl? Like the cordyceps are like fine and kicking.
Yeah.
Like,
Because they are very robust, they have like strong bones and they have red blood, so they are very sturdy. The Aceratus, you can feel that their body is much more slender, their bones are more brittle, and also because they don't have red blood cells and hemoglobin, they're always kind of like on the lower limit of what they want to have in oxygen. So as soon as you just like push them a little bit further, then they just get already shocked.
every other vertebrate on Earth has red blood for a reason. Vertebrates being animals with bones. Every other animal with bones uses red blood to transport oxygen throughout the body. And it works really well. Don't fix it if it ain't broken. That said, the fact that icefish have figured out a way to live without red blood is pretty amazing all by itself. Even if it seems like they would be way better off if they just did it the normal way, they still deserve credit for playing life on extra hard mode for no apparent reason. Or as Professor Detrich puts it,
there are roughly 65,000 vertebrate species currently known. The 16 species of icefish are the only vertebrates that don't make red blood cells. From the scientific perspective, the biological perspective, the interesting question is, well, how do they survive at all?
to answer that question, we'll have to cut one open. But in the name of fairness, let's take a second to think about this from the fish's perspective. They're just asleep at the bottom of the ocean when all of a sudden they're scooped up in giant nets and thrown into these dark tanks to await their fate at the hands of science.
And then bring them back to normal oxygen to see if that actually will induce an infiltration of the.
So this is the blackfin icefish, and we call it blackfin icefish because his first dorsal fin, this one is a little bit damaged, but he's like stained black. So I'm always taking a picture of every fish we dissect. So it's kind of like a common thing with the fish in Antarctica. They tend to have a lot of parasites in them. You see the parasite?
That looks delicious.
Yeah? I can save you the piece of liver. It's probably full of iron.
Or eating anymore.
Oh, you can see them moving around. Ugh.
That's gross.
So we have the liver, we have the stomach, this is the gallbladder, we have the intestine, And nested in between here, we have the spleen, which is a filtration organ for the blood.
Look, the heart is still contracting.
Yes, because so the heart doesn't die right away when you die, and that's why we are able to do heart transplant. The fish heart is only made of two chambers. We have the atrium, where the blood comes and filled first, and then the ventricle, which is a pump. This pumps to the gills, and then all the other organs, and come back to the heart, and just a one loop. And here's the blood coming. You see the whitish, just clear liquid. If you see that it's a little cloudy, that's because there is still white blood cells. So we saved a little bit of blood from these fish, so this is different. Like the white-blooded fish and the red-blooded fish.
1 milliliter of icefish blood can only carry 10% as much oxygen as 1 milliliter of red blood. So the icefish have developed a number of smaller adaptations to try to make up the difference. 1. Icefish have a higher volume of blood compared to similarly sized red-blooded fish. 2. The extra blood requires a bigger heart to pump all of it. 3. Icefish have more capillaries than other fish to help said blood reach more parts of their body. 4. Icefish don't have any scales, so they can absorb oxygen through their skin, kind of like frogs. And 5. Icefish have abnormally large gills. But even with all these smaller adaptations, they're still at a big disadvantage compared to their red-blooded cousins. So the original question still stands. Why are the icefish the only animals in the world to evolve like this? To answer that, we'll have to take an even closer look, and that requires going back to Massachusetts.
If you could please step in to allow those other passengers to pass by you while you're stowing your luggage. It does help our boarding time.
Right, so that's the file, right?
Yes.
This is like a digital icefish, almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1.6 gigabytes.
As you were saying, we prepare samples in the Antarctic, we bring them back. We use those samples to prepare DNA for the species, then we sequence the DNA. And when we have sequenced all of the DNA, we end up with a genome, a digital representation of the instruction set necessary to make this fish.
Wait, hold on. Now we're making fish? We're gonna have to pause this for a second. If you haven't been paying attention to the news, it turns out that all life on Earth is programmed in a code called DNA, which is creepily similar to computer code, except nature's code has been around for billions of years. At first glance, it looks like a random jumble of 4 letters, A, T, G, and C. But the same way you have to write instructions for a computer, in a language that the computer can actually understand, the DNA code is a list of instructions written in a way that the cells in your body can understand. If we can decipher these instructions, we might be able to figure out what's going on with the icefish. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, that very first cell has the original copy of your DNA code. Half from your mom and half from your dad. That original code is then copied trillions of times, once for each cell in your body. But sometimes there are these random errors. The DNA copying process is very close to perfect, but anytime you do something a trillion times, there's bound to be at least a couple mistakes. Each individual instruction in the code is called a gene, and when one of these instructions gets messed up, it's called a gene mutation. Sometimes the letters get deleted. Sometimes the letters get added. Sometimes the order gets messed up. Most of the time, these random errors are small, so your cells can figure out the instruction anyway, kind of like how you can read misspelled words using context clues. But sometimes these random errors are big enough that they have a noticeable effect on your body. But remember, it's all random, so the effects can be bad, and that's what you usually hear about, but they can also be good. For example, when you have a bad mutation, it's called a genetic disease. One example is cystic fibrosis, where a change in the patient's DNA decreases their body's ability to clear mucus from their airways, and it's actually life-threatening. On the other hand, good mutations are almost like superpowers. People from Tibet have a really good one. They have this crazy mutation where their veins can get super wide and they have huge lung capacity, so they can survive on very little oxygen. And that's why it's so easy for them to climb Mount Everest without oxygen tanks. Every living thing plays the DNA mutation lottery when it's born. Most of the time, the effects are so small it doesn't make a difference. But every once in a while...
In this image here, we have the sequence of the hemoglobin gene from the bullhead notothin. And this is shown on the top line in this image.
Bill knew that this was the code snippet that makes red blood in the red-blooded fish. So he thought to himself, I wonder if that same code shows up anywhere in the icefish DNA. This is a huge simplification, but he basically went to the icefish DNA and said, Command F, find this red blood gene. And lo and behold, there it was.
Red-blooded species DNA sequence is shown on the top. The dots show letters that are identical in the icefish gene. By and large, this segment of icefish DNA is identical to the red-blooded fish, but everything breaks down at the arrow.
It's like what we were talking about in the beginning of the video, right? It's like sometimes letters get added, sometimes letters get mixed up, right? So,
and in this case, we've lost a big segment of DNA. And that's the smoking gun for explaining why the Antarctic icefishes do not make red blood.
So not only have the weird feeble icefish survived without red blood, now we can definitively say that they had red blood at some point in the past, and then de-evolved and lost it? Like, this makes the original question even more confusing. Isn't this exactly the kind of thing that natural selection should stop from happening? Yes, DNA mutations are random, so sometimes you get new good traits and sometimes you get new bad traits, but the all-powerful hand of natural selection is supposed to pick out the good traits and only pass those along to the next generation. So if icefish had red blood at one point, why would they lose it if it makes them worse off?
I think the question, like, at least the way I like to see the question is not thinking why would that happen, but it is more like, why did they manage to survive? Because we know that mutation happen all the time. We are accumulating mutations and we are changing, and probably somewhere else in the world, some animals have lost red blood cells and hemoglobin as well. But other places, they would probably not survive.
See? It does have something to do with Antarctica. Let's think about this one more time, but again, from the fish's perspective. From our point of view, Antarctica is a desolate wasteland of death and suffering, but the Antarctic Ocean is one of the most fertile places on Earth. There's tons of oxygen in the water, there are these naturally occurring currents that pull up nutrients from the bottom of the ocean floor, and there's tons of krill and phytoplankton to eat. It's essentially fish paradise. There's only one problem. The water's so cold, it'll literally freeze you solid. But it wasn't always like that. 40 million years ago, the Southern Ocean was a normal temperature and had all the different kinds of normal fish. Sharks, catfish, cod, etc. But then Antarctica split off from the bottom of South America, the Drake Passage opened, and the water started to cool down. Once this happened, all the normal fish swam north for warmer water, but one family of fish stayed, the notothenioids. The notothenioids didn't know it at the time, but they had a DNA mutation superpower that was about to become very, very useful. They had antifreeze in their veins. So while all those other fish fled north to escape the cold, the notothenioids are just looking around thinking, why are we the only ones left in fish paradise? But then they remembered that they're fish and they don't ask questions like that, so they got back to eating and having babies. Now what does that have to do with de-evolution? The theory goes that the notothenioids had it so good in empty fish paradise that survival of the fittest turned into survival of everybody. The environment was so perfect and so easy to live in that even a weird, feeble mutant like the icefish could find their own little niche in the ecosystem. That antifreeze protein is their ticket into fish paradise. Red blood? We can take it or leave it. Anywhere else in the world, a white-blooded fish would be killed off immediately. But here, in fish paradise, there's room for everybody. And that also means evolution can work both ways.